So this is being recorded tonight, and the breakout rooms will not be recorded. So just be aware of that. So feel free to participate, knowing that they will not be recorded. And then also, if you can just rename yourself tonight, that would be really helpful as I put you all into breakout rooms. If you're not sure how to do that, if you're on a computer, if you hover over your video, there's these 3 little dots that show up. And if you click that, a little bit of a drop down comes down and you can click on rename. And when you choose rename, you can just rename yourself to your full first and last name. That will be really helpful for me. And then because you can't unmute yourself, please do use the chat box if you have any questions that you want answered by the panelists during this first section, or if you're having any tech issues. Do know that if you ask a question, we'll do our best to answer it during the Q&A portion this evening. But if we don't get to it, please just hold on to that question and share it with us during the breakout room session. So that is an option for you as well. And I think that is everything that I have for tech stuff this evening. And we really hope that you enjoyed tonight. And I'm going to pass it back over to Shanisha.
Thank you, Ivy. And don't be afraid to use the reaction buttons at the bottom of your screen. If you hover over, you would see reactions. And I'm going to encourage you as I introduce our moderator / panelist for tonight, one of our favorites, Melissa Nicholas. If we can show some love to her, thumbs up. I said high fives, there's no high fives. Hand claps or thumbs up will be appreciated. But thank you, Melissa, for being here again. And please take it away.
Hello, everyone. Hello to those that were here at our last event, those that have never been here before, those that couldn't make it before and made it a mission to be here today. Whatever brought you here today, we just want to thank you so much for being here. This is how you continue to do the work. You don't just do it once and then you leave it there. You keep reinvesting yourself. So for tonight, I just want to introduce some of the other panelists. As you know, I will also be speaking in some of these questions, but tonight we do have Herlene Dawes, who is an MD candidate at St. George's University School of Medicine. She also went to Waltham High and Brandeis. Wasn't really in her bio, but I just had to shout that out. That is a Waltham native right there. We have AJ Scott with us tonight. Again, if you remember in our last panel discussion, she was a radical self-love coach. She's here again to bless us with that light and love. Then we have Chris Bijou, who is the founder of Bijou Consulting Group, LLC. Again, we have some of the same people who were in the panel last event, and they are going to bless us with some of their wisdom. So for our first theme, multiple stories experiencing racism from a classmate. When the student who was called a racist remark stood up for themselves and often tried to explain why what that student was saying was hurtful, they experienced punishment, such as being yelled at by a teacher, detention, or suspension. The student who said the racist remark did not get into trouble. So for our first question, Chris, how would you suggest a teacher handle that situation in the future?
Melissa, thank you so much. And thank you to everyone for joining us this evening. It's a really great question, a very loaded question at that too. Honestly, in these situations, I think one, in terms of radical transformation, what would be needed really is the exploration of how we undergo professional development for educators. Many times that they are not sort of, for lack of a better word, conditioned to see these issues from a lens of color. And so when we're thinking about how Black and Brown students are treated in the classroom, oftentimes by educators, it continues to perpetuate that, that inferiority, that racism that is so destructive and debilitating. And so we have to challenge educators to exploring why they believe these things about their Black and Brown students and their students of color. Where do those ideas and ideologies emanate from? And ultimately equipping them with the necessary skills to approach those conversations and to find a way to move forward with their students. Sometimes it's intentional blindness, honestly, and other times it's just, it's an ignorance that's very intentional, because I believe these days that the information is out there. And there are things that educators can do to better themselves, but they will have to ask themselves some very difficult questions. And if they don't, I believe that those type of educators need to be removed from the classroom because they don't help our students, they hurt our students.
Absolutely. That is a wonderful answer, Chris. Next question, please. And the question's for me. How should a student move forward when they stood up for themselves and were shut down? So from personal experience, when you're standing up for yourself, that moment is for yourself. You stand up for yourself because there are certain words that you stand up for yourself because you probably felt like you were silenced and dismissed, and that is something someone put on yourself. When you stand up for yourself, regardless of how people answer, you are taking your own power back. So not always people are going to meet you with what the validation that you're probably looking for, or the response might not be great, but they probably were not expecting that you were going to push back on an ideal, or not an ideal, on a perception or on a comment that excuse me, they placed on you. So I do think if it's a more serious instance, like a student says anything, you stand up for yourself in the moment, but you also take it to the appropriate people. You take it to the teacher that you need to report it to. You take it to your parents, but also just you should also feel validated in the moment that you stood up for yourself, because that alone was extremely difficult. That's not easy for students to do. That is something that, as much as we encourage, it is hard to get into the mindset of being like adversarial with someone else, even when they have placed that on you. So definitely, once you stood up for yourself, do not get defeated and end there. Try to affirm yourself that, I did that. I stood up for myself. I took some power back. They said something to me and I told them that's not okay, because they will not treat you in that same light again. But after that, keep it going. If it's something extremely serious, you take it to the appropriate authority and adult figures in your life, and you keep it going because you felt something, and you should feel valid in what you were feeling. That's my answer. Okay, may I have the next question, please? AJ, what self-care methods can be helpful to deal with a situation when you experience racism?
Yes, thanks, Melissa. I love this question so much. Also, I love your previous comments too around kind of like reclaiming your power. It's like you can't have my peace. It's a choice. So I love it. So there are many different methods, self-care methods that we can do and use for ourselves. And I just encourage you all to figure out what that is for you, right? What that means putting yourself first, whether that is, taking that time and take that walk. Do you need to spend 5 minutes in the sunlight? It's just really making certain that you meet yourself where you are in that moment. And in terms of tonight, what I'll do is I'll share 2 key self-care methods. And the first one is one of my favorite words, and I share it with my clients all the time, is to be epic. Yes, I mean epic in the sense of what the word means, which is to be grand, to be remarkable, to be spectacular, right? Which we each are, and myself included, and you are too as well, right? But it also stands for this acronym that I love to call Everyday People in Control. Okay, we are an everyday person in control of our lives and how we think, feel, speak, choose to love up on ourselves, and how we choose to love up on others, right? But what we cannot control is other people's thoughts, feelings, reactions, and how they may have that towards us, right? We can't control that. We can control our reactions, right? Which is why I use the word epic. So in terms of that self-care method is acknowledging the fact that if you're experiencing racism or any type of ism, it's the fact that I am epic. I'm an everyday person in control of me, right? And how I choose to look at this situation, how I choose to stand up for me, using that words of Melissa, take that power back for me, right? You are in control of that. And it's 2 parts to that. The first part is, what's in our control is figuring out what is not in our control. And what is not in your control, you have to simply do what? You got to release that. Okay? You got to release that and let that go, because you can't control that. Meaning, whatever that remark someone said to you, if it sat right or didn't sit right with you, you can't control that, right? But what is in my control? And what is in your control, you focus on, is it important for me to take action right now? Okay, is it important for me in this moment right now to speak, right? Or is it important for me in this moment right now to walk away? Okay. And then the other part is that what's in your control is to figure out, is this a moment that I speak now, or should I deal with this at a later time? Meaning that, should I put this on the bookshelf for a later date? Right. So in terms of those self-care methods, one is just acknowledging that you are an everyday person in control of you. So if you know that you are an epic person tonight, if that's a new term for you, a new acronym for you, it has to be, I created it myself. Type it in the chat. Type in the word epic, right? Epic. Like, I am epic. I want to see those epics come through, because we definitely each are epic. I want to keep it very interactive today. And so that's one technique. The other technique, yes, thank you, Christy. Thank you, Ivy. Yes, yes, yes. We definitely are all epic. And the other part of the self-care method I'll share very quickly is 3 steps to it. Is to, 1, pause and breathe. Step 2 is to acknowledge. And step 3 is to act. Okay, I'm coming in with some steps because I want you all to get some results and to know that you have the power within you to choose however it is you feel like it's best to show up for you in any given situation, whether you are experiencing a heavy moment or a calm moment, right? So you remember, pause and breathe, step 1. Step 2 is to acknowledge that feeling, that emotion, whatever is coming up for you in that moment, and then you act. Okay, you do one small action, one small form of self-love for you to counteract that particular state that you're in at that moment, right? So for example, if I'm feeling overwhelmed or anxious, right, as a remark or a racist experience I just had, well, you know what? I'm gonna pause. I'm gonna take my few deep breaths. I'm gonna acknowledge that in this moment I am hurt. I am not okay. And it's okay to not be okay. Okay. And it's okay to be okay. Right. But in that moment, it's okay to acknowledge that feeling. Right. And to say, okay, this is a heavy moment for me, but and this is temporary. Right. So what can I do? What small act of self-love can I do for myself right now? And that could be taking a walk. That could be getting the sunlight. That could be calling a good friend, right? Whatever that is for you, is always asking yourself, what do I need in this moment? And give it to you. And give it to you. Okay? So I'm gonna stop talking. I know that was a lot just then to take in so early on, but I want to make certain you really have true concrete steps to really meet you where you are. And that's what it's all about.
No, that was beautiful, AJ. I think what we're setting now is that you can be epic and you should claim that for yourself, but also utilize the chat more, affirm any sentiments that you hear, give praise, love to the panelists that you like, interact with each other. Unfortunately, in this virtual capacity, we can't interact in the way that we'd like to, but this chat is one of our main forms of communication outside of my lovely voice. So I do encourage everyone to, utilize the chat, uplift and affirm anything that you've heard, and, let's continue community. So the next question, I actually believe the next theme. Yes, so several students mentioned experiencing racism and discrimination in the high school, but often felt like they might have been a buzz for a while, but then felt like there was no real change. So first question, or next question, please. Herlene, you graduated from Waltham High School. You are doing a session later this evening on creating spaces for conversations around mental health. What do you think students or teachers can do to continue the conversation and not just talk about situations when they happen?
I think, so we're going to talk about this later in the session, but it's very important for teachers to realize that the classroom has to be a safe space. A lot of times individuals from different backgrounds, this is the time where they're meeting these people for the first time. So when we hear microaggressions, micro insults, micro invalidations, we see people act on their implicit bias. That could be very detrimental to an individual's academic success, specifically people of color. So it's really the teacher's responsibility to be the ally for people of color in these classrooms when they do hear these type of remarks, right? In Waltham High School, when I was there, I had allies there with my guidance counselor, my teachers. And so they also need to be able to speak up when they hear microaggressions occur, because students need to feel like they belong in the classroom. They need to be reaffirmed that their intelligence isn't marked by the color of their skin, isn't marked by the stereotypes that society has placed on them. Oftentimes we see people who say these insensitive racial comments is because they don't know better, right? And so again, teachers need to educate themselves so they could be the person to dismantle these type of ideas that these people who are not of color are coming in with, because most likely they have these perceptions from at home, right? Or at work, in the dance studio, in the practice with football, basketball, whatever it may be. So that initial interaction where you, as a teacher, you see a student, say a microaggression against another student, this is an opportunity for the teacher to not call them out, but to educate them, right? Use this opportunity in your classroom when you create a safe space. So not only is it a learning moment for the person who's not of color, but the person of color feels like, okay, I am seen, I am heard, who I am as an individual is validated because my teacher spoke on something. And even when the person of color is not in the room, right? We might hear, if a teacher sees someone in the hallway, they hear a discussion of a racial comment being made that's insensitive. That also is an opportunity for the teacher to educate that student. I always say students and teachers are learning in the classroom, right? And you should leave better than you came. In the academic career, what did you learn? It's not only the curriculum that the teacher presented, but also you as an individual socially. What have you learned socially? Because you're learning from one another. This is the first time I might have encountered someone from a different country, right? You come with your implicit bias. Everyone has implicit bias, but how are we dismantling it? How are we looking at our ugly truths, making sure that we're not leaving with the same perception that we came in? So I think that's something that would help this type of situation, with the idea of racism buzzing around. The way we can dismantle it is teachers speaking up, being allies. Yes.
Absolutely, Herlene, absolutely. Very important sentiments there. I really hope if there are educators in the space with us that they're really taking in these words, especially because the burden is not falling on our students. We are not the ones that need to be taking up a lot of the intellectual and emotional labor. So next question. Chris, as a community member, how can someone continuously play a role in fighting racism?
Thank you for the question. It's a very important question. When I think about the concept of community, I differentiate community with a lowercase c and community with a capital C. They mean different things. And so when I think about community, it comes with 4 main pillars, as I shared in the last session. Community embraces history, culture, context, and geography. So when you are a member of a community, you have a responsibility to those 4 pillars. And when you are actively engaged in fighting against racism as a community member, there are several steps, right? And I will differentiate between what white allies can do and what community members of color can do. And even that term I find to be a very funky term for me these days. So a lot of the racism that's felt in communities by people of color are often based on historical racism that's passed on from generation to generation that resonates and plays out in very contemporary forms with obvious collateral consequences. For white community members, it's very, very important that you continue to interrogate and analyze your role and your power and your privilege, and what are you doing to perpetuate that mindset and that feeling of inferiority? Because part of the problem that we have, the world according to Chris, and communities, is just that there are a lot of people who superficially say that they are active in the fight against racism, but they are actually, the ones that are unconsciously at times perpetuating that role of, that sort of racial hierarchy. You must analyze the decisions that you're making within the powers that you have, within the privileges that you have. What are you doing to exacerbate the problem, right? Because it's very easy as community members to just say, well, the problem is too large. There isn't much that I can do. And so this is as far as I can go. you all have a lot of individual power. Within your roles, you must analyze, what is it that I'm doing, right? What am I doing? How am I showing up? How am I seeing these problems differently? And the reason why we have to go through a seeing, being, doing type of framework is many community members are very hasty to do. Everyone wants to just do something because it's very difficult to talk about the problems. It's very difficult to dissect the problems, but no one wants to see the ways in which it's impacting those who are most immediately affected by racism. And so, in that haste to do, they're exacerbating the problem. You must slow down and begin to see the issues. What is missing? What is missing? What has historically been missing? How have I been a part of that sort of messaging, right? How do I need to reframe? How do I need to re-educate, reskill, upskill myself in order to address these issues? Now, for community members of color, there's a role you too must play. And I think one of the most insidious things about racism is that, that internal component. One begins to internalize the messages, right? And then you really do feel in many ways that you are these things that they have said you are, right? You're not smart, you're not educated, you're not beautiful, you're not all of these things. And at some point in time, you must ask yourself, like, well, it must be true. I'm hearing it so frequently in places where I thought I would be safe. There must be some truth to it. For community members of color, if you're in a leadership role, it is very, very important, honestly, that we not sort of push on the idea to youth that they must sacrifice their individuality for the sake of conforming, right? Because youth are uniquely individual. And I think that they have a lot of these ideas and they have their uniqueness, and that gets stripped away at some point in time because they begin to feel as if in order for their community, in order for their schools, in order for people to see them, they must behave a certain way. They must talk a certain way. They must act a certain way. They must dress a certain way. And that way is very Eurocentric. It's not what maintains their identity. And so you strip that away from them. And we see that playing out, right? We often hear the, tell Black men to pull their pants up. If they pull their pants up, maybe they would be treated differently. Well, there are many Black men with their pants up, and I don't see them being treated any differently, right? And so we have a lot of these biases and sort of ways that we're pushing that on. And so as community members, identify what is your role? What power do you have? How are you using your privilege in order to reframe, in order to change the narrative, right? And once you do that, continue to do it every day. It's not an opt-in, opt-out kind of conversation. Once you're in it, you're in it. You have to move from allyship to being a co-conspirator, right? If you are in it, show up every single day. Be willing to risk what these kids risk every single day. Be willing to risk what they're willing to risk every single day. But the moment it becomes unsafe and you become complacent in your role and you retreat, that doesn't help them. It doesn't help you. It doesn't help the community, right? In essence, all it does, it perpetuates the problem. So you must identify, what is my role? What have I been doing? How can I do that differently? And how can I slow down to begin to see the issues from a lens of color through the eyes of those who are most impacted by my actions, by my decisions, by the actions and the decisions of the community at large? And how can we change that? Until we do that, it's just more lip service.
Thank you, Chris. Those were really powerful words. I don't know if anyone caught the ally to co-conspirator. That is very, very meaningful words right there. I think that, well, honestly, I'm going to let those words sit in the space because I really think it's important that we're digesting all that these panelists are saying, because these conversations, unfortunately, are not always available to the community. They're not always being put out there. So I do thank all of our panelists for all that they've said thus far, and we have so much more to come tonight. So next question. AJ, as a community member, what can someone do when they see someone being a target of racism or discrimination?
Yeah. Okay. I have a response for this question, but I'm still processing myself, Chris's comments, and I'm letting that sit in with me too. That's just so powerful, right? Because as you were talking, I can't help but think about like W.E.B. Du Bois' work around the double consciousness, right? And how that whole concept is about, Black folks tend to move through the lens of not just them own selves, right? But then of the lens of everybody else, right? Constantly having to perform, constantly having to act, right? But what happens if that lens of performing for other people, but just for yourself is the only way to be lived, right? The only way to move. And so that just reminded me, and in terms of what's happening in the atmosphere and where we are right now as a culture and as a society, there's a shift happening where a lot of people of color and a lot of folks are realizing that, hey, I don't really have to move through the space of how other people think I should be, how other people think I should be acting, right? But what is it that I want to say for me? What is my voice? How do I sound? What does it look like to beat to my own drums? Right. And I think we are in that powerful shift where we're starting to see people say, I don't think I like this toxic work culture anymore. I don't like what you said. And people are stepping up and stepping out and using their voice for good. And I'll give you an example to now move into my question that I was asked. What can someone do when they see someone being a target of racism or discrimination? Well, 2 weeks ago, I was having dinner with my boyfriend and I. We have a 4-year-old cockapoo whose name is Harmony. All this context is important of what I'm getting ready to share. Well, it's important to me, so I just wanted to share it with you all. And so it's a Tuesday night, and we're having dinner, and I noticed there's this Black woman who's sitting right next to us. There's so much rage, there's so much anger within her. She's just highly upset, and I'm not certain why. And so I saw that she paid for a bill. It was a huge scene, so much so that the security guard of that particular space we were in, they were called. They escorted her out. She came back in a second time to the space, even though she was escorted out the first time. And I'm like, what is happening? And then she left the scene, that space again, and then came back a third time. And then this third visit, when she was back in this space outside at this restaurant, her words shifted. And she started using language such as, I'm feeling unprotected, I'm feeling unsafe, and I'm afraid for my life. And in that moment, I'm like, okay, somebody has to move. Somebody needs to do something. And I was like, wait, I am that somebody. I am somebody. And so I noticed when she was sitting at that table 45 minutes prior, she had left her glasses. So I walked over to her, and her scene, the security guards are there. And I walked over to her and I gave her her glasses. And I said to her in a very calm manner, I said, you stated you feel unprotected and unsafe. What do you need to feel safe and protected? Because they have called the cops, and if they get here, it's going to be a bigger problem. And she stated, can you walk me to my vehicle? And I said, yes, I can do that. Right? So in that moment, right, it was that's such a powerful moment, because it's seeing the human, right? Not just this woman that's just like anger and there's this rage, but it's just seeing this human that's crying for help and wants to be protected and feels unsafe around the security guard. So when this question says, when can, what can you do when you see someone being a target? It's moving. It's doing the next best right thing that's within you that you feel moved to do for you. Because in that moment, I could have just stayed seated in that chair and be like, oh, let me just wait till the cops come. Like, no, that's not going to sit right with just who I am as a person. I have to protect this woman, this spirit. Like, it's a beautiful person. And so I was ready that day. So I just encourage you all, if you are ever in that moment, to just move and think through if you know you got that warm feeling inside of you that if you don't move, right, then are you willing and ready to live with the consequences of your actions for not moving in that moment? Right? Not saying that you put yourself in harm's way. Definitely be calculated and think about the situation through thoughtfulness in that moment. But also just being okay just to be courageous and to be bold, right? And to be loud and to be free. Because when you're free and you move, then other people are able to move and be free too as well. So I'll end my talk off there.
I just want to comment on what AJ said, because I think for me, I'm looking at, you were present, right? You were present in that individual's life. A lot of times we see issues occur around us. Oh, that's not my problem. Oh, that's her business, right? And when we do that, we are shunning we're silencing her needs and her cry for help, like you said. And I think a lot of times you see people who are not of color say, oh, that's not my problem, I can't relate. But we're all humans. And I think that's what you said. You saw the humanity in her. She was just crying out for help. And that touched me so much, because you were just present. You decided to insert yourself, be a part of her solution rather than be a bystander. And often, too many times, we're a bystander in the workforce, in the classroom, in the lunch line, when we're getting our coffee. I just came here to get a coffee. This is not my problem. Well, you stepping in could change someone's situation completely. Is the idea of being present, the idea of recognizing that if this person was your sister, would you have stepped in? If that was your mother, would you have stepped in? Thinking about, at the end of the day, human to human, it's more than, this is not my problem. And granted, you might not feel like you had the time, but if, like you said, you could live with yourself by not doing something that you could have changed the situation, then okay. But that warm feeling inside you, knowing that you can leave a positive impact if you stepped in, if you were present, could it make a huge difference?
Yeah. That's
No,
it.
absolutely powerful words. We did have a question in the chat that, Chris, you have been responding to, but we wanted to know if you wanted to, lift up your voice to the rest of the group. I can ask the question again. Perry T asked, Chris, talking of community, is white silence today, as it is referred to, the main promoter of racism in communities?
Melissa, thank you. And I think I would, sort of reiterate what I shared with Perry in the chat, is that, again, just the world according to Chris, I do not think that white silence is the main promoter. I do think that it is a major promoter, but I do believe that the white savior complex is more problematic. And the reason why I deem that to be more problematic is I understand beyond a cognitive understanding why many white people don't say anything. I mean, if you are benefiting from certain societal privileges that span more than 500 years, and you realize actively speaking up jeopardizes that power, that privilege, and you want to benefit from it, then you shut up, right? You keep your mouth shut and you pretend as if you don't see. I get that. I don't agree with it. I don't think either of us agree with it, but I can process it, right? I can make sense of that. I find more dangerous those that are actively using their power by always coming to the aid of a person of color under the guise of being an ally, and we realize that they're not advancing the work at all. They're actually using that as a limiting factor to stopping progress and transformation. There are many organizations that are doing this today, right? There are tons of funding that's been going around the past year, and I have been making it a more than a mental note. I've been jotting down the numbers. How much money are organizations getting in order to advance this work? And I've realized that there are a lot of organizations that are led by many powerful white folks that are alleged allies. Okay, and so when I think about that, and I think about the ways in which they want to help, I now have a responsibility to track, where is that money going? How are they using their power and their privilege? I think that savior complex is more dangerous, because when you have that complex, you don't really take the time to intentionally sit down and to listen and to understand how people continue to be hurt and how racism impact their lives, in very insidious ways, right? We talked about microaggressions before. The evolution of that is the daily assault on their dignity. For these folks, it's not micro, right? It's not micro. And so when you have people who are, always saying, well, this is what we're going to do and this is how we're going to do it, who don't really live that experience on a day-to-day basis, but they always want to help, it scares me. It scares me because I think it's a way of suppressing voice, and it's a way of perpetuating racism. And so I really do think, again, that's why seeing is so important. We have to see it from a different lens. When you think about the history of this country, I mean, it's steeped in more than 400 to 500 years of anti-Black racism, which can be used as the foundation to understanding racism for all communities. When you think about that, and how many white folks have really been allies when it was convenient for them, and the moment it stopped being convenient, they were no longer allies. And I think that's where the white savior complex kind of evolves from, and that's why that scares me more. Is I don't know if your allyship is authentic, and I don't know when it's superficial. And so that's why I want people to say, look, this term allies, it seems to be a buzzword. Like, every year we find a new term around diversity that becomes a new buzzword and everybody latches onto that. I don't need allies anymore. I've been so beyond allies. I need people who are willing to risk what I'm willing to risk every single day. Like, you really have to be my co-conspirator. When I say I'm willing to risk my life for this, you need to, and I don't need you to risk your life, but what I do need you to risk is to identify, what are you willing to risk? What are you willing to risk? And it can't just be, words. It can't be lip service, because the way I'm impacted by this every single day is very different. I can't turn this off. The moment I wake up, there's this anxiety that's building within me, right? There's this anxiety that's building within me. There's no one that's going to come and save me. There's no one that's going to come and save me. And so we have to move away from that complex and really take time to listen and to understand why these things continue to happen. We're still talking about racism in 2021. We will be talking about racism in 3021. It is part of the fabric of this society. It is part of the fabric of this society. And so we really have to take the intentional time to really listen and see how people are impacted, and then analyze, what actions am I taking? That's perpetuating this. If we don't do that, then you're not saving anyone. You're not saving anyone. So that's really where I go with this. And so I really, it's more than a kind challenge to my white allies who aim to be co-conspirators, is to really, I mean, honestly, every single day, you must analyze your decisions. You must evaluate the choices that you make, especially for educators. When you are in the classroom, you must evaluate those choices, because they leave lasting impact. They leave lasting impact. And that type of impact, again, is internalized, because we hear the historical messages, but we see the contemporary collateral consequences. And so if you're not analyzing that, and you're in a very privileged and powerful role of helping advance this, then are we really doing the work, right? Not just your job of being an educator. Are you really doing the work? This work is 24/7. The moment your eyes open, the work starts, right? Because for me, whether my eyes are open or closed, it doesn't matter. I'm dreaming. I'm having nightmares about this stuff. I can't turn this stuff off. No one is going to save me. You may think you are, but trust me, you're not going to enter my dreams and my nightmares, and you're going to pull me out of it. And so I need you to analyze those decisions very carefully.
Thank you, Chris. Absolutely, absolutely. We do have another question in the chat that I wanted to ask the panelists if they wanted to speak in. It's very quickly. How would people know if their actions are certainly being helpful or hurtful, or if it's performative or if it's authentic in nature? Just if anyone wanted to speak to that point. I know a lot of questions are coming in, and we encourage that, but also remember, we do have the breakout group, so you'll be able to ask those questions during those times too, but I'm not discouraging anyone from asking questions.
Yes, I love that question. I'm just gonna use it based off the example that I just shared with my interaction with the woman. And if you notice, the first question that I said, the very first word that I said to her was you. I did not say I was not used whatsoever, right? So it's constantly making certain that if you really know that you are doing the work, and it's coming from a place of intentions, but intentions can also be harmful, but in truly knowing that you are actually making moves and making strides, is that person is leading where you're trying to help and guiding the conversation, and you're just the vehicle to just help get them there, right? And so in my interaction with that woman, I said, you stated you feel A, B, C, right? So using those exact words, it's a negotiation technique. And it's I didn't realize I was doing that until I looked at someone. She was like, "Do you know you were negotiating?" It's like, no, I did not. But it's always putting it back on the person, right? And letting them guide you. And it's like, okay, you feel these ways. What do you need then to feel protected and safe, right? And let them answer the question. And then you move based off how they want to move. So you have to remove yourself off the way completely because it's not about you. In that moment, it was not about me. You know, I was not on display, even though me as a Black body, I could have been on display, right? But it was not about me. It's not about you. It's a bigger, situation out there, especially if you are. I love this word about co-conspirator because I myself have moved away from language of allyship to using language such as like an advocate. But I love this idea of a co-conspirator. I think that's right there because to me, I see a co-conspirator as if we are armed and armed. We are locked together. We are like side by side. And so if you are not side by side during that work and you're the one that has the microphone in your hand, leading the charge, then that work may not be as impactful, especially if your target is to help communities of color, and you're the only one that in that space that's at the head of the table. It shouldn't just be you at the head of that table. It needs to be all people at that table. So it's just reflecting, when you're in these conversations, if you're making these decisions, are you really making those decisions based off from the center of I? Are you making this from a position based off of a place of what do you need? And then you've really given those individuals exactly what they need. But as a person of color, you're giving yourself what you need. You are asking yourself the questions of I. Okay, let me not get that part confused. It's like, what do I need in this moment? How do I need to feel safe and protected? What brings me joy? Right? So it is a different lens and a different hat of moving. And if you're that person that says no a lot, as like a person of color, as a Black person, or however you choose to identify as, if you're that person that says no, it's just encouraging yourself to say yes in this moment, to speak up and just like, I don't like this. This is not okay. Right? So it's also, yes, it's like that. Let's encourage our advocates, our co-conspirators, but let's also encourage our Black and brown kids to also speak and validate their emotions and their thoughts and give them space to talk and to be free. So I hope that answered the question. I feel like I just went on a nice, lovely tangent just then.
No, it did. It did. It hit every point and more. Probably more than we could have asked for. So thank you so much for those words, as always. I think we're going on to our next theme, which is many Black and brown youth in Waltham and beyond have experienced others assuming they were uneducated and therefore treated differently in their classroom and beyond. So for our first question, Chris, what are some tangible steps community members and teachers can do to educate around existing biases towards Black and brown students?
That's a very, very good question. Community members and teachers. I'll add on to one of the answers that I was putting in the chat. I am one of those radicals that believe that a critical first step, that helps see the issue differently, is through a process of atonement and forgiveness. And I don't know if we can get to atonement and forgiveness without doing something that's. But I'll talk about that later on in the breakout group, so I won't say it here. But nonetheless, if you want to educate yourself around your existing biases, you must first know what your biases and your blind spots are. I mean, you have to know what they are in order to overcome them. And I know that this tool has been under attack the past couple of years, but I really do implore everyone to take the implicit association test. I really do. And I think it's a very good tool. You can do it online, in private, at home, to help kind of identify if indeed there is a bias on the basis of race that exists. And if it does, that's where you can begin to analyze the decisions that you're making. With teachers, I mean, we can go as far back as we can, but I'll use a very fixed starting point and example. In the 1930s, Kenneth and Mamie Clark underwent, they conducted what became known as the doll studies. It was a very, very famous and to some infamous study that highlighted the ways in which racism contributes to the inferiority in kids. Okay. And now after this, after the results, what they found was that, they took kids between, ages of like 5 to 7 or 5 to 9, and they asked them a series of questions, using a white doll and a brown doll. They would ask which doll is white, which doll is brown, just to make sure that the kids can acknowledge visible differences. Then they would ask questions like which doll is beautiful, which doll is not beautiful, which doll is smart, which doll is not smart. And then the last question they would ask is, now which doll looks most like you? What they found, whether white or black, boy or girl, 3/4 of the respondent identified all of the positive traits with the white doll and the negative traits with the brown doll. Now, these kids learn this from someplace. They learn this from someplace, right? And so if they're learning and they're beginning to form social circles on the basis of color, what happens is now when they go into schools, and we know at the time schools were, very, very segregated, and still some parts of the country, schools are probably more segregated today than they were pre-Brown versus Board of Ed. These kids are still forming social circles on the basis of color. And educators are still being very, very discriminatory on the basis of color, right? Because there are things that they have learned which were very misleading and downright wrong and dangerous about Black and brown youth, which ultimately they grow up to be adults. That they don't have the same mental capacity as whites. Their IQs are lower. They don't have the ability to learn as well. They require different learning to all of these things. One has to ask, where the hell did all these things come from? Right? They originated in order to maintain that form of racial superiority. It was a tool to maintain racial superiority. And so if educators and community members are not identifying what their biases are and why they hold on to those assumptions and beliefs, they cannot eradicate them. And so the implicit association test is an opportunity for you to put that on display. Now, what I do with clients, because many people want to take the test and keep the results secret, is after we take it, and this is with like organizational CEOs and directors, I have them print out their results and bring them in. And we talk about it. We talk about, hey, did my results show that I had a slight preference for, whites or Blacks or moderate or strong? How did that make you feel? Like, did you start evaluating, like decisions that you were making? We really do have to analyze that. The problem is we talk so much about bias and we don't try to identify the source of that bias that it's really hard to overcome. Teachers and community members must identify the source of their bias. That's really one ways in which we can root it out the classroom, because there has to be something practical that we can, wrap this conversation around for community members and teachers, but they also must be transparent with their results with their students. You can't hide it. If you're going to do this work, do the work. Be transparent about it so you can hold yourself accountable and others can hold you accountable, right? Because that is the only way that we are going to move forward together. Look, I realized that I didn't make the best decision in this particular situation. I didn't see it then. This is what I could do differently. This is how I can make a different decision. Did you see what was missing for me? How did that land for you? How do you think I can learn from this? These are all conversations that we need to have, but we get so focused on not wanting to be wrong that we don't want to engage in these very difficult conversations. Community members and teachers are members of the community. We don't have to break them apart. Teachers are members of the community. They are one and the same, right? Community members need to have these very real conversations and they need to be transparent. We can't have these conversations in isolation. We can't have these conversations in secret. We must put it all out there, because once we put it all out there, others will help you see what you cannot see yourself, right? Others will help you see what you cannot see for yourself. And so if you're not doing that, then I think we're doing a disservice to the work. So again, my challenge to all is to take the implicit association test. I can go on an epidemiological rant about, the ways in which people are attacking it. I won't. I will spare you that intellectual conversation for another time. But I do think it's a very powerful tool that allows you to at least identify, the strength of your bias, and it changes, right? Now you have a baseline example. Okay, today I've identified that I have a moderate preference. If I start to make different decisions and I take this test 6 months from now, will the result be the same? Will the result change? Did I, improve, or did I regress? Okay, that's why it's very important to undergo that process, because now we have no baseline. I saw a question in the chat that says, well, how do I know my actions are working, right? I'm making the right decisions. Well, you need a baseline. You need a baseline. You'll know you're making the right decisions when you can have these conversations transparently and honestly, and you find that, others are responding to you differently, and you're responding to them differently. It's not doing it for them, right? You don't become aware of your biases for anyone else. You become aware of them for you, because it's the right thing to do. You're not doing it for them, you're doing it for you. So that's why you must identify your baseline, because you need to do this for you, and then it will impact the community in a more transparent and honest way.
Absolutely, absolutely. That is the key to all of it. Don't do a thing if it's not for yourself. It will not go anywhere. It won't grow. It won't inspire you. You won't take every action and step in your life in an authentic way. So next we have the last question of this portion of the night, and then we will transition into a breathing exercise led by the lovely AJ Scott. But before that, Herlene, for youth who experience inequity in the classroom, what steps can they take to overcome?
So kind of like what Chris said in terms of teachers, right, and learning their own implicit biases. I think for me, I was lucky enough to have teachers who knew their implicit biases, and I can use them as allies, right? And so it's hard because everyone has their own different type of experience in the classroom, but I'm a big advocate of using your voice. Oftentimes as a Black woman, as a woman whose parents came from Haiti, so I'm first generation, as a Haitian American, right? I am the first of many in certain spaces. And I find myself trying to make people comfortable with my Blackness, right? So it's not a threat. So they can feel like I'm one of them. I'm speaking proper. I'm showing off my intelligence so they know that I've read books at home. But with that, I'm silencing myself because I'm trying to overcome the stereotypes and fit into what is looked as appropriate. And sometimes that's equatable to whiteness. So oftentimes in the classroom, as a person of color, you find yourself being silenced, but not using your voice. So when you use your voice and you're able to call out, like I said before, on those type of microaggressions, there's micro insults that make the classroom feel like there's inequity, right? You have to call it out. Use Shirts for Allies. My assistant principal was an amazing ally. My guidance counselor, I was able to find people who saw potential in me, who I was able to share my story. A lot of times it feels like a burden, right? Being the only person of color in your classroom, having to share your story so people know that you don't fit into the stereotypes, that you're not what the TV shows explain, but there's so much healing power when you're sharing your story, and that gives you that voice that allows people to not differentiate you, to be able to differentiate you from the rest and be able to understand, okay, what am I doing wrong? Because how can I make this a safe space? Using your voice. And if you can't find it at Waltham High, which I know Waltham High is doing a great job of making sure their teachers are more culturally competent. So if that teacher isn't showing up and being an ally, then like you as an individual, unfortunately have to, take steps to talk to the assistant principal, because they are doing the work. There are workshops. Are they actually learning from it? Are they taking away from it is the question, right? And you're put in the position as a student that you want to be academically successful, and you know that this environment is detrimental to your success. So you have to use that voice and speak to an assistant principal, go join your guidance counselor, speak to them, a coach who might be an ally who knows you. If you're a part of YMCA, the Waltham group, if you're part of Boys and Girls Club, right? You have allies in different sectors, different programs who have connections to Waltham High and are able to help break down that type of unsafe academic environment in the classroom.
Can I just add that I love this conversation of all the steps that Herlene just provided and Chris, and then it just got me thinking about this term. And it's basically, we're talking about the psychology of oppression. that is what we're talking about here. And it's basically, it's generational, right? And it all started with slavery, and then those impacts of who's better and less than, right? The closer you are to white, it's supposed to be all things quote unquote good and pure, right? And then the complete opposite of that is evil and dark, and it's unclean, right? And in this case, it's talking about like the Black body. And so, and what we're seeing now, right, is still the major hurt and the impacts of that. And because if not, when kind of what Chris was uplifting earlier too today, we wouldn't be talking about racism in 2021. If we knew the fact that at the end of the day, the common denominator that we all have is human. That's what we are. We are human, right? It's not less than, better than, equal to, it is what it is, right? There are differences. There are differences to make us stronger, but that doesn't mean a person is less than, right? And that's what it is. It's like people treat folks differently if you don't see them on the same playing field as you, right? But if you saw me as you see you, right, of being human, then that could begin to play some things differently in terms of how folks choose to treat other people. So it's that part. And then another part that's coming up for me now is this amazing work by Dr. Joy DeGruy. And her work is around post-traumatic slavery syndrome. It's an amazing book that she has written out. So I would definitely encourage you all to check that book. And it's really also given that language too on like ways to come back, these different forms of racism that has been happening, all stemming out from the slavery era, specifically within the US context. Because that's also what we're talking about too, is this, not even, it is a global issue, but this kind of like national emergency security issue that has been happening for generations. And what we're talking about here is hitting on the fact of what are some ways in which we can come back and uplift that. But in order for us to come back and uplift anything, we have to know what it is and why it exists and why it still exists. And I love what Chris was mentioning too, someone called it out, it's the word acknowledgement, right? Being transparent, right? So that was what was coming up for me. I just had to share it with you all.
Thank you so much. But AJ, please take the space and lead us in a breathing exercise.
Yes, okay. Thank you, Melissa. I'm so excited for this. And this is called a loving kindness meditation. Okay, so what I'm going to do is just encourage you all to ground yourselves, meaning that just ensuring that your feet are solidly planted on the ground. Begin to just relax your shoulders. If you got to do a little shrug, just relax them. And then what we're going to do together in this space is we're going to take 3 deep breaths. Okay, we're going to inhale through our nose, and then we're going to exhale out our mouth, and we're just going to do that 3 times. Starting now, let's take that first deep inhale together through the nose, and then release it. If you have to do a big sigh, you do a big sigh, On the next, let's inhale together. Here we go. Big inhale through the nose. And out through the mouth. And then we're going to do one more together. Inhale through the nose. Yes, out through the mouth. And I just invite you all in this moment to close your eyes and think of someone or something that makes you feel love. Like a child, your pet, flowers, dancing, singing, and find something that generates a feeling of loving kindness. and allow a warmth to grow in your heart, and then feel this warmth spread throughout your whole body and direct that energy toward yourself. And if you want, you can place your hand on your heart and say to yourself silently, may I be well and happy. May I be filled with peace and a feeling of security. May I feel loved and cared for. May I feel strong, safe, and secure. Don't worry or criticize yourself if you can't feel much at first. It takes time, right? And so next, bring to mind a person who you have a lot of fondness for, like you really respect this person. And imagine them right in front of you. And send them feelings of loving and kindness. And say in your mind, may you be well and happy. May you be filled with peace and a feeling of security. May you feel loved and cared for. May you feel strong, safe, and secure. And when you are ready, just continue to be mindful of those final breaths that is coming your way. And then bring the attention to your body. And then slowly open your eyes and return to this space. And so I know that we've been sitting for a long time. And so if you have to stretch, you have to roll your neck or move your arms around or do the little shakes. Yes, just welcome all of that. Yeah. And give yourself a hug. I feel like we've been having a very tense conversation today. A good conversation today, a needed one. So it's okay to show up for you in this moment and to love up on all of you first. That's so important. All right. Now I take it back to Ivy.
Awesome. Thank you so much, AJ. That was wonderful. I know it can be heavy conversations. And so we really, A, appreciate all of your valuable insight over the last hour, but B, really acknowledge that it's really important to practice what we're talking about and taking care of ourselves during all of this. So being able to create that space. So really grateful to you, AJ, for creating that space. So we are now going to transition into our breakout session. So we hope this was a really great jumping off point for all of you to really have this conversation around racism and practicing self-care. Sorry, I'm just putting myself back on spotlight. So hopefully you all can you can see me. And so we're gonna transition now into our breakout rooms. And so this is a great way, if you didn't have an opportunity to get your question answered, it'll be a great way to have that space. And so there's 5 different breakout sessions. The first is creating safe spaces for conversations on race. And that's with Marissa Maddox and Herlene Doss, who you just heard from over the last hour. Then we have finding your community at predominantly white colleges. That's going to be led by Dr. Maria Madison from Brandeis and Daniel Santival. And then we have creating change together. So we have Anna, Chantal, and Marisa here from Waltham Black Future Fund, who will be sharing information there. Staying motivated to fight for change despite resistance from others. You'll hear from Chris again. And then the power of self-care for healing. So if you enjoyed that meditation, you'll be getting more of that self-care in that breakout session. So we're now going to be transitioning to those sessions. It'll be really a space for you to have discussions with your facilitators. Again, those will not be recorded, so we're actually going to stop that recording now. And so what's going to happen is we're going to transition you into your breakout rooms. Some of you might not get the breakout room of your choice that you chose when you signed up. Some of you kind of had an opportunity to choose your first, your second, your third choice. So we kind of had to move some people around, and a couple people I know just joined, so I don't have you in a room just yet. So just bear with me if you're hanging out with myself and Katie for a couple minutes, but we will get you to a room. So we're gonna do that. So in a minute, if you've never done a breakout room before, you're gonna get a little box that comes up on your screen that's gonna say the host is inviting you to the breakout room that you selected. You'll just click the accept or whatever it says. It's like okay or accept. And you'll just kind of get taken through the cyber world into that breakout room. And then you'll come back once we finish. So do stick around if you can. We'll come back for a closing at the end around 8:20, and then we'll say our goodbyes. So enjoy those breakout sessions, and we'll see you back here in a little bit. And I'm going to open those rooms now.